Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely wild and highly volatile situation that's been unfolding in Newark, New Jersey. What started as an organized protest has rapidly escalated into a full-scale nighttime lockdown. We're going to look closely at the sudden, incredibly high-stakes curfew imposed right outside Delaney Hall, which is a facility currently operating as an ICE detention center. Things escalated incredibly fast here, resulting in fiery clashes, intense political crossfire, and a really aggressive law enforcement response. If you've been following the ongoing debate around immigration and detention centers, well, you already know tensions can run pretty high. But the events at Delaney Hall over the past few days, they represent a severe sudden flashpoint. We're going to break down exactly what happened, who was involved, and what ultimately ignited this whole standoff. To really understand the severity of the situation on the ground, we have to look at the immediate response from city leadership. On May 31st, Newark Mayor Ras J. Baraka issued a statement declaring that due to an escalating situation, immediate action was required to protect public safety. And this plunges us right into the urgency of the moment. The city didn't just put out a friendly warning. They enacted a strict, daily curfew around the facility running from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. every single night until further notice. When a mayor publicly cites an increasing need for police intervention, you know the baseline level of public safety has been significantly compromised. The city made it crystal clear. Anyone violating this curfew would face initial warnings and then physical removal from the area, summonses, and further legal action. It was a direct mandate to clear the streets immediately. And honestly, this wasn't just a matter of telling people to pack up and go home. The physical restrictions were intensely strict. The curfew directly targeted Dormus Avenue, which runs right by the facility. Local enforcement completely shut down all pedestrian traffic in the area, and vehicle access was severely limited. You couldn't just casually drive through anymore. Access was restricted exclusively to those with verified official business. And the perimeter actually expanded, too. The New Jersey Attorney General noted that state police had to be called in to secure a much broader area, well beyond just the immediate space outside Delaney Hall, just to ensure comprehensive safety. Okay, let's dive into this, because the core question we have to ask is what exactly pushed the city to lock down an entire avenue? According to reports from local authorities, the anti-ICE protests had fundamentally shifted from peaceful demonstrations to violent clashes. We're talking about suspects actively throwing projectiles at officers, physically ripping up the very barricades that were meant to secure the protest area and using them as weapons, and even dragging tires right into the street and setting them on fire. This wasn't just a loud demonstration anymore. It was a physical confrontation that actively endangered everyone in the vicinity. What makes those aggressive actions even more dangerous is the specific situation the officers were actually in at the time. To ground this in the reality on the ground, officials pointed out that the local police who initially absorbed this aggression were not even in protective riot gear. These officers had been on location since early in the morning, and their primary mission was just to ensure that both protesters and counter-protesters had a safe, designated area to exercise their First Amendment rights. The sudden escalation from masked individuals put those unprotected local officers in immediate physical danger, which ultimately forced them to call in state police backup just to protect themselves and the peaceful demonstrators who were still hanging around. Now, let's peel back a layer and look at a deeply revealing statistic from the aftermath. 5. During briefings following those fiery clashes on May 30th, authorities revealed that state police arrested 6 people. Out of those 6 individuals arrested for this intense violence, 5 of them were from outside the state of New Jersey. This is a massive piece of the puzzle. It completely shifts the dynamic from a localized community uprising to a situation where people from entirely outside the state were coming in, interfering in the protests, and actively escalating the danger. This whole concept of outside influence immediately became a massive national talking point. Just a few days earlier, on May 27th, President Donald Trump actually addressed these exact anti-ICE demonstrations during a cabinet meeting. He explicitly stated, "These aren't protesters. These people are fake. They're all paid for." So you have a situation where both local authorities responding on the ground and a Republican president are publicly pointing to outside, organized escalation, albeit in very different contexts. But it highlights a national narrative that these protests were being fueled by forces way beyond just local concerned citizens. So the absolutely crucial point here is understanding how this massive chain reaction started in the very first place. Because before the burning tires, before the riot police, and before the curfews, there was a letter. Over a week prior to the curfew, an open letter was released by illegal immigrant detainees being held inside Delaney Hall. This single document served as the spark that ignited the entire standoff, drawing activists, politicians, and eventually those out-of-state agitators right to the facility's gates. And this brilliantly illustrates the massive, seemingly irreconcilable gap between the two sides of this narrative. On one hand, the detainees, backed a bit later by Democratic lawmakers, alleged horrific conditions, physical and psychological torture, a complete denial of necessary medical care, and a sheer lack of basic food. On the exact opposite end of the spectrum, the Department of Homeland Security issued a total denial on May 25th, actually accusing politicians of spreading misinformation. DHS stated unequivocally that detainees receive 3 meals a day, clean water, showers, clothing, and full access to medical care and legal representation. It is a complete clash of realities, and this specific, intense dispute over the conditions inside is exactly what drove all that fury outside. Following that initial denial by DHS, the political crossfire intensified rapidly. 8 Democratic members of Congress from New Jersey, including Representative Mikey Sherrill, stepped in and issued a joint statement that doubled down on the detainees' allegations. They didn't just express mild concern, they actively elevated the rhetoric. They labeled the situation inside the facility an absolute abomination, publicly supported the outrage of the local protesters who were showing up for their neighbors, and issued a very strict ultimatum. They declared they would not rest until Delaney Hall is permanently closed. Let's put this into a timeline because seeing it chronologically shows just how fast this powder keg exploded. On May 25th, DHS officially denies the detainee allegations. Just 2 days later, President Trump claims the growing protests are the work of paid agitators. Fast forward to May 29th, the 8 Democratic representatives issue their joint condemnation, further raising the political stakes. The very next day, May 30th, the peaceful protests fracture as masked individuals ignite fiery clashes at the barricades, attacking unprotected local police. And finally, on May 31st, Mayor Baraka drops the hammer and imposes the strict nighttime curfew to regain control of the streets. From press releases to burning barricades in literally just 6 days. However, right in the midst of the lockdowns and the riot police, there was a recent move to try and de-escalate things. Representative Sherrill and other lawmakers had made a series of demands for reform at the center, and on the exact same day the curfew was announced, DHS actually granted a concession. They announced that limited visitation would resume that day, May 31st, with regular visitation hours being restored the very next day. Representative Sherrill positioned this as an attempt to lower the temperature and urged everyone to return to peaceful protesting to avoid any further escalation. They're also continuing to push for strict guarantees on medical care for the detainees. Which brings us to the ultimate question facing Newark and the broader national immigration debate. Will these minor concessions regarding visitation hours actually be enough to ease the incredible tension that led to burning barricades and curfews? Or has the momentum shifted so significantly, now backed by powerful congressional lawmakers, that Delaney Hall is ultimately heading for permanent closure? It's a wildly complex, multifaceted standoff involving local safety, federal policy, and intense political pressure. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Definitely keep your eyes on how this develops because the underlying issues here are far from resolved.